Dr. Sarah Bennett glanced at her silver watch as she pulled into the private terminal's parking lot at Los Angeles International Airport. It was 7:15 a.m., giving her plenty of time before her 8:30 a.m. flight to Boston. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the California air, casting long shadows across the spotless luxury cars that filled the parking spaces around her. As she stepped out of her Tesla Model 3, Sarah smoothed down her navy blue blazer and checked her reflection in the car window. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of being one of the country's top neurosurgeons. Her natural hair was styled in neat, professional braids, and her simple pearl earrings caught the morning light. The security guard at the parking lot entrance nodded respectfully as she walked past. Sarah had used this private terminal dozens of times before. It was a necessary convenience given how often she flew across the country for emergency surgeries and medical conferences. Today's flight would take her to Boston, where 500 medical professionals were waiting to hear her keynote speech about her groundbreaking technique in pediatric brain surgery. Rolling her carry-on bag behind her, Sarah reached into her leather handbag and pulled out her folder of documents. Inside were her ID, pilot-approved passenger manifest, and all the other paperwork she always carried when flying private. Even after 10 years of charter flights, she never left anything to chance. Being organized was as much a part of her nature as breathing. The glass doors of the terminal slid open silently, welcoming her into the cool, quiet space. The private terminal was nothing like the busy main airport terminals. Instead of crowds and noise, there were elegant seating areas with leather chairs, fresh flowers in crystal vases, and the soft sound of classical music playing through hidden speakers. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the complimentary beverage station, where a barista was carefully arranging fresh pastries. Sarah spotted a few familiar faces, other regular private jet customers she'd seen over the years. A famous actor sat in one corner, hidden behind sunglasses and a baseball cap. A tech CEO she recognized from magazine covers was typing rapidly on his laptop near the window. This was her world too, earned through years of hard work and dedication to her field. Walking toward the security checkpoint, Sarah felt good about the day ahead. Her presentation was ready, saved in 3 different places as always. Her surgical residence back at Los Angeles General Hospital were covered by her capable colleague, Dr. Rodriguez. The hospital in Boston had already sent a car service confirmation for her pickup. Everything was perfectly planned, just the way she liked it. She pulled out her phone to check her messages one last time before heading through security. There was a text from her daughter Maya, a second-year pre-med student at Stanford. "Knocked them dead at the conference, Mom. Love you." Sarah smiled, typing back a quick "love you too, sweetheart. Call you when I land." The terminal's massive windows offered a clear view of the private jets parked outside. Sarah could see her chartered plane, a sleek Gulfstream G650, being prepared for takeoff. Ground crew members moved efficiently around the aircraft, performing their pre-flight checks. It was a beautiful morning for flying, with clear blue skies and barely a cloud in sight. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah gathered her documents and ID, a routine she had performed countless times before. She noticed a new security guard she hadn't seen before, a man with a stern expression and rigid posture who seemed to be watching her with unusual intensity. Something about his stare made her slightly uneasy, but she brushed the feeling aside. After 15 years as one of very few black female neurosurgeons in the country, she had learned to ignore such looks. Sarah took a deep breath of the climate-controlled air, enjoying these last few moments of calm before what would be a busy day. She had no way of knowing that in the next few minutes, this routine Thursday morning would turn into something very different. The new security guard was about to create a situation that would not only test her patience but would end up making headlines across the country. With her characteristic grace and professionalism, Sarah stepped forward toward the security checkpoint, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She had no idea she was walking into a confrontation that would spark a national conversation about racism and privilege in private aviation. Matthew Wilson stood at his post, his security guard badge gleaming under the terminal's bright lights. As Dr. Sarah Bennett approached with her documents ready, his eyes narrowed. He raised his hand in a stopping motion, his body language immediately hostile. "Excuse me, but where do you think you're going?" Wilson's voice was loud enough to make several nearby passengers look up from their phones. His tone carried a sharpness that didn't match the quiet, professional atmosphere of the private terminal. Sarah maintained her calm, professional demeanor. "Good morning. I'm here for my 8:30 flight to Boston." She held out her folder containing all her documents. "I have my ID, passenger manifest, and all required credentials right here." Wilson didn't even glance at the papers. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked past her toward the entrance. "Are you sure you're in the right place? The main terminal is in the other direction. This is for private flights only." "Yes, I'm aware," Sarah replied evenly, though she felt her heart beginning to race. "I'm Dr. Sarah Bennett. I'm on the approved passenger list for the Gulfstream G650 to Boston. Here's my documentation." She tried again to hand him the papers. Wilson finally took the documents but made a show of examining them with exaggerated suspicion. "These could be fake," he said, flipping through them roughly. "We get people trying to sneak in here all the time." A small group of passengers had stopped pretending to look at their phones and were now openly watching the scene unfold. Sarah noticed an elderly couple whispering to each other, their eyes wide with concern. "I assure you, everything is in order," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. "I fly through this terminal regularly. You can check with your supervisor or the flight crew. They know me." "Oh, they know you, do they?" Wilson's voice dripped with sarcasm. He pulled out his radio. "I'm going to need to verify these documents. Could take a while. Maybe you should just head over to the main terminal where things might be more your speed." Sarah felt her professional mask starting to crack. In all her years of flying, she had faced subtle discrimination before, but never anything this blatant. "Sir, I'm a neurosurgeon heading to Boston to deliver a keynote speech at a medical conference. I've flown from this terminal dozens of times. There's no reason for this level of scrutiny." Wilson let out a short, dismissive laugh. "A neurosurgeon? Right. And I'm the President of the United States." He turned to face her directly, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Listen, we both know you don't belong here. So why don't you save yourself some embarrassment and leave before I have to call security backup?" The absurdity of a security guard threatening to call backup on a legitimate passenger might have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. Sarah pulled out her phone. "Actually, I think I'll call the terminal manager myself, and I'll be recording this interaction from now on." "Are you threatening me?" Wilson stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "That's it. I'm calling this in as a security threat." As he reached for his radio again, a voice called out from behind them. "Is there a problem here?" A well-dressed businessman had approached, his own phone already recording the scene. "This is none of your business, sir," Wilson snapped. But Sarah could see him shifting uncomfortably as more phones came out among the gathering crowd. "I think it is our business," said a woman in a pilot's uniform who had just walked up. "Especially since some of us are witnessing what appears to be clear discrimination." Sarah stayed silent, her phone steady as it recorded Wilson's increasingly agitated behavior. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept her chin high. Years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room had taught her how to stay composed even when her heart was pounding. More people were gathering now, forming a loose circle around the scene. Wilson's face had turned red as he realized he was being recorded from multiple angles. But instead of backing down, he seemed to dig in deeper. "Everyone needs to step back," he shouted. "This is a security matter, and I will have all of you removed if necessary." The situation had reached a boiling point, and Sarah knew the next few moments would be crucial. She hadn't asked for this confrontation, but now that it was happening, she was determined to stand her ground, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever faced similar discrimination and stayed silent. The private terminal, usually a place of quiet luxury, had transformed into a stage of rising tension. Security guard Wilson's face grew redder by the minute as more passengers pulled out their phones to record. Dr. Sarah Bennett stood her ground, her documents still clutched in her hands, watching as the situation spiraled further out of control. "I'm calling for backup," Wilson barked into his radio, his hand shaking. "We have a situation at the main checkpoint. Multiple hostile individuals interfering with security protocols." His voice echoed through the terminal's high ceiling, drawing even more attention. A young woman in business attire stepped forward from the crowd. "The only hostile person here is you," she said firmly. "We all saw how you treated Dr. Bennett without even looking at her credentials." Wilson spun around, pointing his finger at the woman. "Stay back. This is a restricted area, and I have the authority to remove anyone who interferes with security procedures. More voices joined in from the growing crowd. We're not interfering, we're witnessing, called out an older man in a suit. And what we're witnessing is absolutely shameful. Sarah took a deep breath, maintaining her composure even as her heart raced. She'd faced challenging situations in the operating room, but this was different. This wasn't about saving lives. It was about fighting for her basic dignity. Sir, she addressed Wilson calmly, I understand you're doing your job, but you haven't even properly reviewed my documents. I have every right to be here, and your behavior is becoming increasingly unprofessional. Wilson's response was to snatch her documents roughly from where they lay on the counter. Papers scattered across the floor, including her medical license and flight authorization. Several people in the crowd gasped. Oh, now look what you made me do, Wilson said with fake concern. Dropping suspicious documents all over the place could be a security risk. Before Sarah could respond, a tall man in a pilot's uniform pushed through the crowd. Captain James Rodriguez, a senior pilot with 20 years of experience, had just walked in from the tarmac and immediately recognized what was happening. Dr. Bennett, he called out, his voice carrying authority. Aren't you supposed to be on my flight to Boston, the one where you're going to teach 100 other doctors about your new surgical technique? Wilson's head snapped toward the pilot, his expression flickering with uncertainty for the first time. You know this person? Know her? Captain Rodriguez laughed in disbelief. Dr. Bennett saved my nephew's life last year. She's one of the top neurosurgeons in the country, and she flies with us at least twice a month. People in the crowd began picking up Sarah's scattered documents, handling them with care and respect, a sharp contrast to Wilson's earlier behavior. Each paper they found further proved her credentials, hospital IDs, medical licenses, flight authorizations, conference invitations. Look at this, someone said, holding up a magazine that had fallen from Sarah's bag. She's on the cover of Medical Innovation today. There's a whole article about her work with children's brain tumors. Wilson's backup finally arrived. 2 more security guards who looked confused by the scene before them. One of them, an older guard named Martinez, immediately recognized Sarah. Dr. Bennett, what's going on here? Is everything okay? Martinez asked, concern evident in his voice. Wilson tried to regain control of the situation. This woman, I was just following protocols. She could have been anyone trying to sneak in. The only protocol you were following was racial profiling, a voice called from the crowd, followed by murmurs of agreement. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice clear and steady. I would like to speak to the terminal manager immediately, and I want everyone here to know that I appreciate your support, but please stay calm. We're going to handle this the right way. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people now, all watching intently. Phones continued recording as Wilson's backup partners exchanged uncomfortable looks. Through the terminal's windows, several flight crew members had gathered, watching the scene unfold. The manager is already on his way, Martinez said quietly. Dr. Bennett, I'm so sorry about this. This isn't how we do things here. Wilson stood frozen, his authority crumbling as the reality of his actions began to sink in. The crowd's phones kept recording, documenting every moment of his spectacular fall from power, as the terminal manager's footsteps could be heard approaching rapidly from down the corridor. The next few minutes would change everything, not just for Sarah and Wilson, but for the entire private aviation industry's approach to security and discrimination. Terminal manager David Chen rushed through the corridor, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. As he approached the scene, his eyes widened at the sight of nearly 30 passengers gathered around his security checkpoint, all with phones raised. In his 15 years managing this terminal, he had never seen anything like this. What in the world is going on here? Chen asked, quickly scanning the situation. His eyes landed on Dr. Bennett. An immediate recognition crossed his face. Dr. Bennett? Oh no. Please tell me there isn't a problem with your flight. Before Sarah could respond, Wilson jumped in. Sir, I was just following security protocols. This person couldn't prove she belonged here. A woman from the crowd stepped forward. She was well dressed in a judge's business attire and had been quietly recording everything on her phone. That's absolutely false, she stated firmly. I'm Judge Patricia Martinez from the state Supreme Court, and I've been watching this entire incident. Your guard refused to even look at Dr. Bennett's credentials properly. Another voice joined in. I have the whole thing recorded, from the moment he first stopped her. A young tech executive held up his phone, including when he suggested she should go to the regular terminal where it would be more her speed. Chen's face turned serious. He turned to Wilson. Is this true? Wilson started to stutter. Sir, you have to understand, we get all kinds of people trying to sneak in here. Let me show you what actually happened, said another man, stepping forward. He was Dr. Michael Chang, a renowned cardiologist who frequently used the terminal. I started recording when I heard his tone. He held up his phone, playing a video that clearly showed Wilson's discriminatory behavior from earlier. The terminal manager watched the video, his expression growing darker by the second. Meanwhile, more supporters continued to gather. A flight attendant who had just walked in recognized Sarah. Dr. Bennett, you operated on my mother last year at LA General. You saved her life. She turned to the manager. This woman is a miracle worker. She performs surgeries that other doctors say are impossible. Captain Rodriguez, still standing nearby, added his voice. Mr. Chen, Dr. Bennett is one of our most frequent flyers. She's literally on her way to teach other surgeons her techniques. This whole situation is absolutely ridiculous. Sarah, who had maintained her composure throughout, finally spoke. Mr. Chen, I don't want anyone to lose their job over this, but what happened here today is part of a larger problem that needs to be addressed. A corporate executive who had been quietly observing stepped forward. I agree. I'm Thomas Richardson, CEO of SkyWest Charter. We need to make sure this never happens again, at any terminal. He handed Sarah his business card. I'd like to work with you on creating better training protocols for all private aviation security staff. The crowd had grown even larger now. A famous actress who had been sitting quietly in the corner finally stood up. I fly through here every week, she said. I've never once been treated the way Dr. Bennett was treated today. This is clear discrimination, and we all saw it. Chen turned to Wilson, his decision made. Turn in your badge and radio. You're suspended pending a full investigation. He then addressed the two other security guards. Please escort Mr. Wilson to HR. As Wilson was led away, his face pale and defeated, more people began sharing their contact information with Sarah. A civil rights attorney handed her his card. Judge Martinez promised to provide a formal statement. The tech executive offered to share his video recordings. Dr. Bennett, Chen said sincerely, I can't apologize enough for this incident. Please, let me personally escort you to your flight. We'll have someone bring you coffee and breakfast while we sort out all these statements. Sarah looked around at the crowd of supporters, people from all walks of life who had stood up against injustice when they saw it. Some were her former patients, others were complete strangers, but all had chosen to speak up rather than stay silent. Thank you, everyone, she said, her voice clear and strong. What happened today was unfortunate, but your response gives me hope. Sometimes it takes a moment like this to bring about real change. The crowd broke into spontaneous applause, their phones still recording, as Chen began leading Sarah toward her gate. This incident, captured on dozens of phones and witnessed by some of the most influential people in Los Angeles, was about to become much more than just a confrontation at an airport. It was about to become a catalyst for change. As terminal manager Chen escorted Dr. Sarah Bennett toward her gate, the morning's events were already spreading beyond the terminal walls. Phones buzzed with notifications as video clips of the incident began circulating on social media. The hashtag #DurBennettStrong was starting to trend locally in Los Angeles. Inside the terminal's private office, Chen sat across from Sarah, his face showing genuine concern. Dr. Bennett, we need to handle this properly, he said, placing a stack of incident reports on his desk. Everyone who witnessed the event wants to give a statement. Sarah nodded, checking her watch. Her flight to Boston had been delayed by an hour to accommodate the situation, but the conference organizers had already been notified and were fully understanding. The thing is, Sarah said thoughtfully, this isn't just about me. This happens to people every day, but most of them have a crowd of supporters or cameras recording it. A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Linda Torres, the terminal's head of security operations, entered with an urgent expression. I just finished reviewing all the security footage, she reported, placing a tablet on the desk. It's worse than we thought. Wilson's body camera footage shows clear bias from the moment Dr. Bennett walked in. As they reviewed the footage, more people asked to speak with them. Judge Patricia Martinez had canceled her morning appointments to stay and provide an official statement. The tech executive, whose video had already gained thousands of views online, was sharing his contact information with the terminal's legal team. Dr. Bennett called a voice from the doorway. It was Thomas Richardson, the SkyWest Charter CEO. My board just had an emergency meeting. We want to work with you to develop new industry-wide training protocols. This isn't just a private terminal issue. It's an aviation industry issue. Sarah's phone kept lighting up with messages of support. Her daughter Maya had seen the videos online and called 3 times. The Boston Medical Conference organizers sent a message saying they wanted her to add a second speech about her experience and the broader implications for professional discrimination. Captain Rodriguez knocked and entered the office. "Dr. Bennett, the crew is ready whenever you are." And he hesitated, then continued. "Several passengers from your flight asked to change their seats to coach so you could have more space in first class. They want you to be comfortable after everything that happened." Chen shook his head in amazement. "In 20 years of aviation management, I've never seen passengers give up first-class seats voluntarily." The terminal's PR team was already drafting a public statement, but they wanted Sarah's input first. "People need to know this isn't just being swept under the rug," said Maria Garcia, the PR director. "We're implementing immediate changes." Those changes were already visible. Outside Chen's office, Linda Torres was giving new instructions to the security team. The 2 guards who had helped remove Wilson were now going through an impromptu sensitivity training session. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was from the American Medical Association. They wanted her to lead a panel discussion about discrimination faced by medical professionals in various settings. The incident was growing beyond an airport security issue into a larger conversation about systemic bias. "We've received calls from 3 major news networks," Chen informed her, hanging up his phone. "They want to interview you about what happened. And the Aviation Security Administration wants to use the videos for their national training program." Judge Martinez returned to the office with a typed statement. "I've detailed everything I witnessed," she said firmly. "And I'm happy to testify if needed. What happened today wasn't just unprofessional, it was illegal discrimination." The famous actress who had witnessed everything poked her head in. "Dr. Bennett, my foundation works with underprivileged kids who want to become doctors. Would you consider being a keynote speaker at our next event? Your handling of this situation was incredibly inspiring." Sarah took a moment to process everything. The morning's horrible incident had transformed into something powerful, a catalyst for change that could help others facing similar discrimination. "Before I head to my flight," Sarah said, addressing everyone in the office, "I want to make sure we focus on solutions. Yes, what happened was wrong, but let's turn it into something positive. Let's create real, lasting change." Chen nodded in agreement. "Dr. Bennett, you're absolutely right, and we're starting that change right now." He picked up his phone to call the terminal's corporate office. This incident wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The real work of creating systemic change was about to start. By late afternoon, Dr. Sarah Bennett's flight had finally landed in Boston. The incident at LAX's private terminal had already become national news, with major networks running the story during their morning broadcasts. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she turned it on after landing. Dr. Bennett called out a group of medical students waiting at the arrival gate. They held up signs reading, "Standing with Dr. Bennett," and "Doctors Against Discrimination." Word had spread quickly through the medical community, and these students from Boston Medical School had come to show their support. Sarah smiled warmly at them, touched by their gesture. As she walked through the terminal, several people recognized her from the news coverage. An elderly couple stopped to shake her hand, and a flight attendant whispered, "We're all proud of how you handled that situation." Her phone rang again. This time it was Terminal Manager Chen from LAX with updates. "Dr. Bennett," he said, his voice excited, "I wanted you to know what's happened since you left. The company that employed Wilson has been fired. We've already signed a new contract with a security firm that specializes in diversity training." Sarah found a quiet corner to take the call. "That's good to hear," she replied. "But what about the bigger picture?" "That's the best part," Chen continued. "The video of the incident has reached the corporate offices of every major private aviation company. They're all calling for an emergency meeting to discuss industry-wide changes." As she listened, Sarah watched more news coverage on the airport TV screens. The videos taken by witnesses had gone viral, with millions of views across social media platforms. But unlike many viral videos of discrimination, this one was leading to immediate action. "There's more," Chen added. "Remember Thomas Richardson, the SkyWest Charter CEO? He's created a task force to develop new security protocols. They want you to be the head consultant." Sarah's Boston driver, who had been waiting patiently, helped her with her bags. As they walked to the car, he said, "My daughter saw what happened to you on the news. She's in high school and wants to be a doctor. You showed her how to stand up for herself with dignity." Inside the car, Sarah checked her emails. The conference organizers had rearranged the schedule. Instead of just her planned speech about neurosurgery, they wanted her to give a second presentation about her experience and the importance of addressing discrimination in professional settings. Her phone buzzed with a text from Judge Martinez back in LA. "Wilson's security company is facing an investigation. 3 other people have come forward with similar complaints. Your stand is helping others speak up." The car pulled up to her hotel, where more supporters waited. A group of black medical professionals had gathered in the lobby to welcome her. Among them was Dr. James Carter, a pioneer in cardiac surgery who had faced similar discrimination in his early career. "Dr. Bennett," he said, taking her hand, "what happened to you this morning is already creating waves. The American Medical Association is drafting new guidelines about professional discrimination. They want to name them the Bennett Protocols." At the front desk, a hotel manager upgraded her room to a suite. "We saw what happened," she said quietly. "It's about time someone with influence stood up and made people notice these issues." Sarah's phone kept lighting up with notifications. The hashtag #JerBennettStrong had gone national. Messages of support poured in from doctors, nurses, and medical students across the country, many sharing their own stories of discrimination. In her hotel suite, Sarah finally had a moment to call her daughter Maya. "Mom, I'm so proud of you," Maya said, her voice full of emotion. "My whole class watched the videos. My professors are using your experience as a case study in medical ethics." As she prepared for her evening conference speech, Sarah reflected on how a horrible morning had transformed into something powerful. The incident wasn't just about one racist security guard anymore. It had become a movement for change. Her phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from Terminal Manager Chen. "The new security company starts tomorrow. Their first training session will use your incident as an example of what never to do. Your experience is already making a difference." Sarah smiled, straightened her blazer, and reviewed her updated speech. Sometimes it took one person standing firm, supported by others who refused to be silent, to start changing the system. Today had proved that change was possible, one stand at a time. 1 week after the incident at LAX's private terminal, Dr. Sarah Bennett sat in her office at Los Angeles General Hospital, reviewing the changes her stand had sparked. Her computer screen showed dozens of emails from aviation companies, medical organizations, and people sharing similar stories. "Dr. Bennett?" Her assistant poked her head in. "CNN is on line 1, and Good Morning America wants to schedule another interview for next week. Also, your afternoon surgery has been covered by Dr. Rodriguez, so you can attend the Aviation Security Board meeting." Sarah nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. The past week had been a whirlwind of activity. The video of her confrontation with Wilson had reached over 20 million views across various social media platforms. But unlike many viral videos that faded away, this one was creating real change. Her phone buzzed with a text from Terminal Manager Chen. "Dr. Bennett, the new security protocols are working great. Every private terminal in California has adopted them. No more incidents reported this week." As she scrolled through her messages, she found an update from Judge Martinez. The investigation into Wilson's security company had revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior. The company had lost contracts with 12 other airports, and their CEO had resigned. "Mom!" Sarah's daughter Maya rushed into the office, waving a newspaper. She was home from Stanford for the weekend. "Look at this," The newspaper's headline read, Aviation Industry Announces New Anti-Discrimination Initiative, the Bennett Standards. Sarah took the paper, reading how private aviation companies across the country were implementing new training programs. The article mentioned how security staff would now undergo mandatory diversity training every 3 months, with real-world examples and consequences for discriminatory behavior. A knock on her office door revealed Thomas Richardson, the SkyWest Charter CEO. Dr. Bennett, thank you for meeting with me, he said, sitting down. Our new training program launched yesterday. We're using the security footage from your incident, with your permission, to show exactly what not to do and how bias can appear in everyday situations. Sarah's computer dinged with a new email. The American Medical Association had finished drafting their new guidelines for preventing discrimination in medical settings. They wanted her to review them before next week's national announcement. Dr. Bennett, her assistant, called again. The Aviation Security Administration is online too. They want to confirm your speaking slot at next month's national conference. As Sarah reached for the phone, she saw another message pop up. It was from a young black medical student in Chicago. Your story gave me courage. Today, when someone questioned my presence in the hospital's doctor's lounge, I stood my ground. Thank you for showing us how to handle discrimination with dignity. Maya, still in the office, showed her mother more social media updates. The hashtag #DurBennettStrong had evolved into a movement. People were sharing their own stories of standing up against discrimination, each one mentioning how Sarah's example had inspired them. Look at this one, Mom, Maya said excitedly. A group of flight attendants started a support network for airline employees facing discrimination. They named it the Bennett Initiative. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Linda Torres, the head of security operations at LAX's private terminal, sent a video. It showed the new security team in training, learning about unconscious bias and proper verification procedures. Every security checkpoint now had signs clearly stating their non-discrimination policy. Another email arrived from the Boston Medical Conference organizers. The video of her speech about the incident had been viewed by medical schools across the country. They wanted her to develop a full curriculum about handling discrimination in professional settings. Dr. Bennett, a nurse appeared at her door. There's a group of high school students here. They're from the Career Shadow program, and they specifically requested to meet you. They say you're their inspiration for pursuing medicine. Sarah smiled, standing up to meet the students. On her desk lay a folder containing invitations to speak at various events, aviation security conferences, medical schools, corporate training sessions. Her calendar for the next 6 months was filled with opportunities to share her story and help create change. Maya hugged her mother before leaving. You know, Mom, what happened that day was terrible, but look at all the good that came from it. You turned one person's racism into a movement for change. Sarah nodded, watching her daughter leave. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best opportunities for transformation. Her stand hadn't just been about one incident at an airport. It had become a catalyst for systemic change across multiple industries. 1 month after the incident, Dr. Sarah Bennett stood at the podium of the National Aviation Security Conference in Washington, D.C. The large hall was packed with over 1,000 security professionals, airline executives, and civil rights leaders. Change doesn't always come from big plans, she began, looking out at the sea of faces. Sometimes it comes from one person saying enough and others being brave enough to stand with them. In the front row, she spotted familiar faces. Terminal Manager Chen had flown in from Leh. Judge Martinez sat beside him, along with Thomas Richardson from SkyWest Charter. They had all become part of what the media now called the Bennett movement. On the large screen behind her, statistics told the story of change. In just 1 month, reported incidents of discrimination at private terminals had dropped by 85%. Over 200 airports across the country had adopted the new Bennett standards for security training. Last week, Sarah continued, I flew out of the same terminal where the incident happened. The difference was remarkable. She smiled, remembering how the new security team had handled her check-in with perfect professionalism. Her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. It was probably another message from Maya, who was now leading a student group at Stanford called Future Doctors Against Discrimination. The group had already spread to 15 other medical schools. In the audience, Sarah noticed a familiar face, the young businessman who had first started recording the incident. His video, which had now been viewed over 50 million times, was being used in training sessions across the country. But the real change, Sarah said, turning to a new slide, isn't in numbers or policies. It's in the stories I receive every day. She showed screenshots of messages from people who had found courage from her experience. A black female pilot who successfully challenged unfair treatment at her airline. A medical student who stood up to discrimination during his hospital rounds. A business executive who faced down prejudice in a corporate boardroom. As she spoke, more messages appeared on her presentation screen. Dr. Bennett inspired me to speak up. Watching her stand her ground gave me courage. Her story showed me I wasn't alone. The conference organizers had set up a special award ceremony after her speech. They were introducing the Bennett Award for Excellence in Security and Inclusion, an annual recognition for security teams that demonstrated outstanding commitment to fair treatment. 1 month ago, Sarah continued, I was just trying to catch a flight to Boston. Today, we're part of a movement that's changing how people think about security, professionalism, and respect. In the back of the hall, a group of young security officers listened intently. They were part of the first graduating class of the new enhanced training program. Their uniforms bore a small pin that read Dignity First, part of the new industry-wide standards. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her hospital. They had just launched a new program called Bennett Rounds, where medical staff discussed and addressed instances of discrimination in healthcare settings. The incident with Mr. Wilson could have ended differently, Sarah acknowledged. But because people chose to stand up, record, and speak out, it became something more. It became a catalyst for change. She clicked to her final slide, showing a photo taken just yesterday at LAX's private terminal. The security checkpoint now had a diverse team of officers, all specially trained in the new protocols. Above them hung the sign, Everyone deserves respect. Everyone belongs here. As Sarah concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation, but she knew the real success wasn't in the applause. It was in the changes happening every day at airports, hospitals, and offices across the country. Later that evening, as she prepared to fly home, Sarah received one last message. It was from Wilson, her former antagonist. Dr. Bennett, it read, I spent the last month thinking about my actions. I'm now taking courses on bias and diversity. What I did was wrong, and I'm working to be better. Your response to my behavior taught me more than any training ever could. Sarah smiled, putting her phone away as she walked toward her gate. The security officer checking her credentials was professional and respectful, just as it should have been that day a month ago. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest moments. One morning, one incident, one stand against injustice. But when people chose to do what was right, those moments could transform into movements that changed the world, one person at a time.